And as the world turns, we turn again to Jewish astrology, a cosmic science. Notice that as they depict the zodiac, it's always in a circle. Now, a little bit of knowledge of what the Ari has to say is that the circle, very, very important concept, because it refers to our world, which is a ball, the movement of our world, which is turning in a circular pattern, the movement of our world through the constellations, which is a circular pattern, and of course our orbit of the sun. Then you look at the other planets, which are called the KRONENBERG, which is the stars, the moving stars. You look at the 7 planets that are there, they're also round. So the concept of round and going around is really an important context. Now we're going to move to a place, and let me just show you the name of the author is YAAKOV KRONENBERG. And all I do is read it and try to learn along with you. Actually, whoops, look out over there. This is a piece, it's not a real long piece, called Prophecy and the End of Days. Let's see what else it says. Prophecy and the End of Days by YAAKOV KRONENBERG. This is a transcription. Now, all that we've been reading are transcriptions for the most part. Reb Yaakov was not a really wealthy guy, but he had enough wherewithal to be able to produce this material. He had at one time, and maybe 10 or 15 years ago, a large following of people on the internet. And so these are lectures that he gave there. This is a transcription of a short discussion on the differences between prophets and astrologers and the predictions about our times. Let's see what he says. So, again, Prophecy in the End of Days by YAAKOV KRONENBERG. One of Rabbi Avraham Barchi's favorite sayings was that if the astrologers knew everything, then there would be no need for the prophets. I've been talking about why people look at these prophets, so to speak, like Nostradamus. And I remember in my university days, at that time it was Edgar Cayce, and people believe in all sorts of weird prophets when they could look back on the ancient books, especially on the Jewish ancient books of the prophets, and you see that prophecies were given thousands of years ago, so clearly written. Or even going back into the Bible, just reading the 5 books of Moses, and you see all the prophecies there, and how they have all come to be fulfilled over the course of history. And if people really want to see the end of days and what's going to happen then, I believe that they should be looking, and not at these weird prophets, so to speak. They should be looking at the ancient prophets, especially those coming from the Torah. I want to read a prophecy that comes a bit later than main prophets. It's a prophecy from the Talmud, which is about after the prophets, so let's say about 2,000 years ago. The Talmud was redacted, meaning edited and put into its final form, about 2,000 years ago. Actually, it's probably more like 1,600 years ago or 1,700 years ago, and it was written by the rabbis of the Knesset Gedolah. Well, he's going back before that. When he says the Talmud, he's referring to the Mishnah. So he says at that time it was put out of the Knesset Gedolah, which is about right after, let's say, the Greeks. The great rabbis of that time wrote down the Mishnah, which was the oral tradition. Now he's talking about Rebbe, who's a person called Rebbe, who wrote down the Mishnah. He's the one that actually wrote it down, because the rabbis knew that the Jews were eventually going to go into exile, and they were afraid that all their teachings and all their wisdom would get lost. So at a certain time they wrote it all down, and they called it the Mishnah. Today I want to talk about a Mishnah that is eventually. Let me see. Today I want to talk about a Mishnah that is discussing the end of days. The end of days, and this is hopefully going to lead to something that eventually I'm going to do a whole series on, which is that the great Kabbalah has divided up the world into 18 periods. Now, I'm not familiar with this. This is a class primarily for astrologers because most of the people that are interested in this are into astrology. So if you are interested in astrology, here it comes. So to give an example, in India they have a time system called the Dasha period. And in ancient astrology they have something called Time Lord systems, where they take a person's life and divide it up into 120 years or 80 years. There are different systems. And each period of life changes depending on what planet is ruling that period of the person's life. So you can say that the first 15 years will be this planet, then the next 10 years will be this planet, then the third 10 years will be the next planet. And then subdivide each period with other planets helping the main planets, etc. So this is an idea of how the heavens are moving. And let me see if I can get this over this way a little bit more. So he says in Judaism, now that's very interesting to me because I don't know really that much about Indian astrology, which we're going to see more about. But here he's giving you an idea because it's the basis of the Hindu religion. In Judaism, we believe in that with history. What was that? Believe there is a beginning to history and that there will be an end to history. So this is important to know. We're living today in the year 5785. So they broke up the 6,000 years. So first of all, granted that the rabbis say that the world as we understand it is going to exist for 6,000 years. The number 6 is the completion of, let's say, Zer Anpin. Then the next 7,000 years, the next 1,000 years, meaning the 7,000th section, is going to be a different, the world will be different. Everything will be different. There will be aliyah of Malchus to Bina, so we will be beyond the minimal consciousness that we have now and be much a greater consciousness at that time. So they broke up the 6,000 years into different periods. This is what the rabbis did. Actually, there are two ways that they broke it down. The first way they broke it down was that every day of the week was 1,000 years. So that's what they did. They learned that from a passage in the Psalms which says 1,000 years in the eyes of God is like one day for us, or something like that. So every 1,000 years, like a blink of an eye to Hashem, is like one day. In the eyes of Hashem, like one day for us. So we learned that 1,000 years is equivalent to a day. So each day of the creation is 1,000 years. We learned that in the first 1,000 years, the sun had an influence, the second 1,000, the moon, etc. So this is part of Jewish astrology. I'm not aware of it. Going on. That is not my concern today. We could spend a lot of time on that later on when we discuss planetary systems. But on top of that, they broke up the history into 18 periods, and each of these 18 periods, the way God ran the world changed. So he managed the world differently. In order to be a good astrologer, you have to be able to tune into these 18 different periods where the direction of the world is different and where God is running the world differently. Let me see if I find my way up to this. Vividly from how he ran it in another time. We're going to be learning about this more, but I want to read you what they wrote in the ancient book of the Talmud, and what it is like to be like in the end of days. Now, this is the period that we're in now. It says, with the footsteps of the Mashiach, this is it's called the Ikvis of the Mashiach, insolence will increase, arrogance and insolence. In other words, it's talking about the footsteps of the Messiah. And the Talmudic commentaries explain that at the end of the exile, just before the coming of the Messiah. So we are talking about our times now, he says, with the ingathering of the Jews. We are talking about the last 50 years. The Jews have slowly been making their way back to Israel, from just about everywhere except for the last outpost, which seems to be America. So I don't want to go into too much, because it's just a short class, but let's just get a feeling for it. It's as obvious as it is written that I don't think I have to explain it too much. In the footsteps of the Mashiach, insolence. Insolence will increase and inflation will soar. Everybody knows that inflation soars. Everybody sees it every day. The inflation is getting more and more. The vine will give its fruit, and the wine will be dear and a little expensive. Even though there will be plenty of wine being produced, there won't be enough because everybody will be getting drunk, using drugs. And the government will turn to heresy. We just saw that in the last explanation, in the last administration. I don't know if it's going to be better. I guess you don't need much to understand that, and there will be no rebuke. What does it mean there will be no rebuke? It means that there won't be anybody high enough to give rebuke to anybody else. If someone gets rebuked, he sits back and says, look, you are no better than me with what you are doing. The meeting places of sages will be used for immorality, and the Galil will be destroyed, and the border towns will be desolate. We know what has happened. Now, it's interesting that he says that because we've just gone through a practice in that with the rockets coming from Lebanon into the north of Israel, and that you had to abandon the border, and it's still fragile. So he said, who lived in Israel in the last war saw what happened to the Galil and the destruction of the Galil. Now, this was written way before this current war, the October, it's what they call the October 7th war. And the border towns will be desolate. Remember, all the people in the border towns where the rockets were falling in the south, and the residents all came into the middle of the country, and no one really cared about them. The border dwellers will wander about from city to city, but they will not be pitied. The knowledge of scholars will be lost, and those that fear sin will be despised. Now, this is all coming out of the Talmud. And the truth will be hidden. Just look at the Torah and all the Jewish knowledge that has been hidden. Only now it is starting to come back. Youth will shame old men, and old men will stand up for youngsters. You see this especially in America, where everybody wants to be young. The old people are despised, and they are trying to figure out how to get rid of them. And everything is about the youth. There will be times when a son shames his father, and a daughter rebels against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies are the members of his household. The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. Now, this is very interesting. I have dogs. I've had dogs most of my life, many different dogs, and I like dogs. Dogs are likable within reason. They are animals. But nonetheless, you say every celebrity, wherever you see, they have a dog. They talk about their dogs, and we love to talk about our dogs. There are a number of explanations to what that means. One is that the rich people have no compassion for the poor people, the face of a dog, right? They just want what they want. So he said, no compassion for the poor people, just like dogs which gather their meat and then keep it for themselves. Another one that I heard is that just like a dog that goes out with his master for a walk, he runs ahead and he looks like he's really leading. But when the master changes direction, and the dog sees him and runs back to the master, because it's the master that's leading. So it is the same way with politicians today. They don't really lead, and they don't really guide people towards living in a better way. They just lead the people in the direction that the people want to go so that they can get reelected. The son is not ashamed before his father. On whom can one rely? Only on the Father in heaven. The commentary here says that no social institutions will remain intact, and only faith in God will provide any stability. I need to get a little drink here. One moment. That is really happening today. I have a site where I predict the future, and over there 2 years ago, he apparently made this site then, I predicted there were going to be revolutions all over the world for the next 8 years, and that there are going to be wars between countries and revolutions and upheavals within the country. And most of it is going to be because of the economic crisis and inflation soaring and no food, etc., and because there is no social cohesiveness anymore. And all of that you see in this little piece, which was actually written about 2,000 years ago. talking about the end of days. And here we are. This is Baruch Fleischman. You've been listening to the Tikkun Elevator Kollel. This is the great work of an astrologer by the name of YAAKOV KRONENBERG.